All right, you can feel free to get started at any time.
Great, thank you very much. And let me call to order this meeting of the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee. My name is John McGlennon. I'm chair of the TSDAC and represent the Virginia Association of Counties. I am a member of the Board of Supervisors of James City County. Thanks to all of you for taking time out today to be here for this meeting. I know it'll be very informative and helpful for us to see where things stand and where we're headed. Let's just take a few minutes to do some introductions, and I'm going to begin that by asking if our new director of Department of Railroad Public Transit would introduce herself and tell us just a little bit of background, if you wouldn't mind, Director Robinson. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's a pleasure to meet you. My name's Tiffany Robinson. I've been the director of DRPT for a little over 4 months now. It's been a really great and busy and eventful 4 months, and I have had the pleasure to meet many of you, but not all of you. So I just really look forward to working with you going forward. I think you probably know a little bit about me, and I'll be very brief, but prior to this role, I was a deputy chief of staff in the governor's office for about 1.5 years, working with the transportation team as part of my portfolio. And prior to that, much of my career was in Maryland, and I'm really happy to be in Virginia now. I was the labor secretary in Maryland for a period of time. I was a deputy chief of staff. I was an assistant secretary in housing. And prior to that, I was in private practice as a lawyer. So I like to say that I have kind of the trifecta covered for our customers, which is housing, labor, and now transportation. I think we all know that they all go hand in hand. And I'm really excited to be doing this work and working with all of you. So thank you for that, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you for that introduction. And it sounds as if you've had some experiences that are going to be very useful in this field, whether it's labor relations and workforce development or some of the other positions you've held. All seem to wind up coming back to transit. Housing certainly be one of those areas as well.
Exactly right.
So thank you. Welcome. I hope you feel like you're no longer drinking out of a fire hose, but
getting there.
It's going to be an exciting time. Let me ask if the members of TSDAC would introduce themselves, and I'll start with Cindy. Cindy Mester.
Good afternoon, Cindy Mester with the City of Falls Church out of the City Manager's Office, and on TSDAC I am representing VML and have the honor of vice chairing with our chair, John.
Great, thanks, Cindy. And Dr. Smoot, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. Raymond Smoot from Montgomery County and member of Commonwealth Transportation Board.
Great, and Kate?
Good afternoon, Kate Mattice. I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, and I'm on TSDAC representing the Virginia Transit Association.
I thought I saw Brian. My screen is not displaying everybody who's on.
Yeah, good morning or good afternoon now. My name is Brian Booth. I'm the Transit Director at Blacksburg Transit, and I am on the board representing CTAB, the Community Transportation Association of Virginia.
Okay, and who am I missing? I know that I'm missing somebody.
Oh yeah, Jim Dyke is on.
Jim, how are you? I didn't see you come in there.
That's okay. Former Virginia Secretary of Education, former member of CTV, former member of the WMATA board. Also had a chance to meet Tiffany through Kyle McColgan a few months ago. So you were in a different position at that point. We had a really good discussion and looking forward to working with you.
Likewise, thank you.
Oh, and I'm going to appoint you from DRPT.
Any other members of TSDAC that I haven't called on?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. This is Noelle Pinkard from Hampton Roads Transit, and I'm representing VTA.
And this is Jamie Jackson.
Again, my screen does.
Jamie was able
Oh, Jamie, hi.
Yep, Jamie Jackson. I am the Director of Transit and Transportation for Fredericksburg Regional Transit, and I represent the RPT as well.
Great. And so with that, I think I'll ask Zach if you would start off introductions.
Oh, sure. We've got a number of staff here. I'm Zach Trogdon. I'm Chief of Public Transportation. We've also got several of our staff here. I guess any of those that might be presented, if you want to introduce yourself real quickly. I think we have Grant and Todd and Dan Sonneclair with us, Tiffany Dubinsky. They're being shy today. We'll move on with it. But yeah, so you all know them. Luckily, they've been around. They've been around us for a while.
Okay.
But yeah, so just in the interest of time, we'll.
Good enough. Good enough. Well, thank you very much for being here. I know we always get very informative and useful presentations and information about what's going on with transit here in Virginia and across the country. We are going to get quite a bit of overview today of what's been happening. But before we get into that, let me just ask, is there a motion to approve the minutes of the October 8th, 2024 meeting or any suggested corrections?
Move adoption.
Okay, motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor, please. Thank you. Thanks, Kate. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions? Great, thank you. I'm going to now turn it over to Zach to introduce the presentations, and we'll begin this process. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you, sir. And so I'm going to share my screen just with maybe not the best looking, but everybody can see where it says today's agenda. Okay, great. So we've already done introductions, minutes. So we're going to just talk real quickly about statewide transit performance. We've been through the end of December, so we've got the calendar year. Just wanted to show y'all what we had in terms of statewide transit ridership. And so what you'll see, and you can find this on our director's reports and stuff. Bus has been coming all the way back, back a lot, and then we break out WMATA and VRE given their their significance to moving people in the state. But it's certainly been growing from over the last year. So this is just the annual ridership here, and so you can see, like we're kind of talking about in October and April and things, when things happen, then holidays happen other times, and so you see a dip in the ridership there. But that's for this 2024 calendar year. Now, in terms of year over year from a few years ago, it's good news. Although we're still working our way back. You can see bus ridership is getting very close to what it was pre-pandemic. WMATA and VRE, given some things just in the last couple of months, we're seeing increases now, but still have been sort of working their way back up incrementally, it seems. So I think it's hard to remember how well things were going back in 2019, I guess, just with the economy and things. But they're working their way back up. So it's a good news story about transit. Again, thinking back to the pandemic, it was an essential service, and so it's still playing out now that we're working out of that still 5 years later. But and then things are continue to change as well. So did y'all have any questions? It's just very quick on that, and any questions or comments about what you all see with ridership and other things?
I just, Zach, if I could, Kate Mattice, I think a comment for those who are sort of watching more closely. I think when we look at the first 3 months of this calendar year, especially in the Washington, D.C. area, they're just blowing through the roof on between return to work. So it'll be really interesting to see how these numbers continue to grow. Really, I would say almost exponentially in the last 3 months here.
Great.
Yeah, we should be able to provide you some of that information, I think, but the first few weeks or so, probably at our next meeting coming up soon. But that information lags, as you all know. But certainly there's kind of anecdotal information out there about the ridership, but it's certainly a change. So thank you.
And with the baseball season starting, I'm going to add to those metro numbers.
Yeah, I guess the cherry blossoms got like a million a day or something the other day, right? So yeah. Well, that's just the Nationals are good, right? They got to put a good product out there. So, so thank you, Mr.
I think
Chair.
we will also need to monitor any federal job changes and it'll be a little slower, but any relocation and the layoffs, we're certainly starting to see it in the city of Falls Church with people coming in for service support. So may have some impact on ridership too the other way.
Yes.
We've got 16% federal employees and a lot of households that are dual federal employees. So
Wow. Always the flip side. Thank you, Ms. Chair. I know we wanted to, I was just sort of just to hit you all up with that real quickly, and get on to the other stuff if that's like to move to the next thing.
Sure.
Madam Director, I was gonna let you chime in here as you want to, and then we'll keep going from there.
Sure. Thanks, Zach. I know that we're all thrilled performance is trending in the right direction. And as Kate mentioned, anecdotally, we believe it's even better than those charts looked just over the past 2 or 3 months. So we're excited to see that continuing trend. But as was also mentioned, we'll be monitoring things very closely. So with that, Zach, if you want to go to the next slide, I'm going to just briefly refresh everyone's memory about how our merit program at DRPT came to be. I think everyone here knows that the Virginia Code requires 24.5% of the CMTF to be allocated to support operating costs of transit providers based on approved service delivery factors that are to be based on effectiveness and efficiency. I'm sure you probably also remember the statutory requirement that these measures and their weights, essentially our merit scoring methodology, shall be evaluated every 3 years. So that's exactly what we're kicking off. And we're happy to be consulting with you along the way. I'm going to turn it back over to Zach in just a minute to review the program history with you, since I wasn't here in the years when all of this was originally established. But as a quick reminder, back in 2018, this body worked with our department and consultants to develop the merit methodology. And then there were some tweaks and changes in 2022. And now, as required, we're undertaking another program review. And I'm still fairly new to this, but this program is extremely complex. And I think this 3-year review is timely because we know that costs are rising and funding is not. So we want to ensure that our funding is going as far as possible. The program is called Making Efficient and Responsible Investments in Transit. So that's what we want to ensure that we're doing with your help. Also, I think it's been 3 years and things have certainly changed since COVID. We have some better data and some lessons learned that we're going to talk about, seeing how the current methodology has been applied over the years. So we want to share those lessons with you in order to help guide our decision making. So, Mr. Chair, I will jump back in towards the end of our presentation to talk a little bit more about the timeline for this review and next steps. But I'm going to turn it back over to Zach, our transit chief, to really provide a refresher for all of you on our program history and how the methodology currently works for both capital and operating. Zach?
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess Cindy had a question very quickly.
Just a comment. I think on sharing the screen, we're now seeing all of our faces and not the
Oh, sorry. Good
slides.
grief. Oh boy. All right, man. I think that's what I was being told. All right, sorry. Yeah, okay.
It's the fun of all these years later
How
still
that
getting
happened. Yeah.
Technology.
All right, now is it okay?
We love it and hate it. Luckily, I was
No, no
only talking on one slide, so you didn't miss
Yeah.
any additional slides.
All right. Now you see your faces again? I keep clicking the wrong. All right. You can
I think
see
we've
Marty's
got the
face?
right document
You're good now.
up there now.
You can see the so yeah, we want to share with you. We actually met with the CTV subcommittee on March 18th, and so we want to share with you essentially what we shared with them. Although this will be, very much a review for you all, having been as intimately involved in this as you have, but just to be consistent and what's being shared. We want to talk, kind of get you all together soon after to also discuss this review with you all. So as the director was saying, in 2018 is when there was really what you might call an overhaul. To get into capital assistance first, sorry, we're going to hit on capital first. We're looking at capital and operating, but the capital assistance, was looked at in 2018, and certainly at that time, I was in the industry, and so were most or all of you. And even from the feds, it was coming down about SGR, and so certainly Virginia was on the forefront of that as well, making sure that we were not just with transit, but on all transportation, investing in what we had and maintaining versus just expanding. So this was what Merit Capital also went towards. And so as you see, the statewide policy of maintaining that state of good repair of existing assets versus just always growing and growing. So with that, some of the more significant changes were the state of good repair and minor enhancement, establishing 68% of that the state could match from that, and then 50% from major expansion projects. And so those were some of the more significant changes to this. In addition to giving WMATA this 46.5%, whatever it was at the time. Sorry, 2008. It might. Kate knows a little more about that. The percentage changed, but again, kind of giving WMATA, not giving, but having WMATA set aside to get a certain allocation that allowed them to to let other stuff go towards other transit agencies in the state as well, and kind of set that aside. And then VRE followed here recently, sort of in a similar vein. And then in 2022, there were some other tweaks to the program. You all reviewed it rather comprehensively and made a few tweaks that we'll get to some more details about each of these in just a minute. So just to remind you all of the process we go through that results in our allocation each year. We take applications just for that, relatively short period of time. And so it's a busy time of year then. And we do screen projects for eligibility, and then what we call readiness, whether it's kind of that shovel ready thing that all levels of government talk about, so that we're not having money sitting out there. So we certainly want to look at those as the first step. So then we do, then separate those into various categories. State of good repair, which is, again, replacing assets that have reached their useful life. Minor enhancements, which we'll talk about a little bit more as well, which are more of a, adding to your service or your operations. And then the major expansions, which we don't get a lot of because they are high ticket, complex, but we do get a couple of those, several every year. So those are the three project types inside the capital assistance program. Again, we operate according to CTV policy. And so the way that this prioritization and scoring process is set up, we detail that in our transit capital assistance technical documentation. And so there's no surprises really for our grantees and others. And then we come up with scores, and the funding is allocated down to either where there's no other projects to score in that score high enough to be funded, or there's not any additional funding left. So those scenarios can result. I mean, just because we have money left doesn't mean we're going to fund a project that perhaps does not fit within what we want to do. So then we get those together in April, which is obviously this month, and then in June is when it's actually adopted by the CTV. So that's the process and quick summary. This graphic here summarizes the scoring elements that we use within the state of good repair. I'm sorry. So no, this is where we sometimes get a question about when we talk to the CTV and them about an example of types of projects that each category encompasses. So we've developed this slide to show just an example of projects, and also just the larger category fit into. Again, SGR, replacement, rehabilitation. Revenue vehicles is obviously the largest thing. That's our priority. For minor enhancements, it might be other things like new assets, adding capacity, and you see camera systems, things at facilities. And then major expansions, BRT is something that's been coming up lately in the facilities as well. So that's questions we often get when we do talk to someone like the CTV, is just getting examples of those. So next was this. This is a graphic that's been around. We've had this for a while. It summarizes the scoring elements that go into our capital prioritization and scoring process. And you all that have been on TSDAC, helped develop this, and so it's been a tried and true method. The question we also, I don't want to dwell on this too long. So this is the one for SGR, and in a second I'm going to talk about a service impact score. That's one we get questions about. And so these would come up, and 110 points is the maximum. If something gets the maximum, it's going to get funded. That's the way we intended it. That's the way it goes. So that's for SGR. Similar, minor enhancements don't fit as easily into asset condition because they don't all have useful lives, or maybe don't have useful lives developed that are standard. So we simply start with the service impact score and go from there. And so that's why the total score is much less, but again, they're all compared to each other. So, and so we often get a question about how exactly do you, we get the question, how exactly do you do that? I think there's this perception that we take each project and 10, 8 out of 10 points for operating efficiency. But of course, I think you all are involved, and that's just not really something we could do in a February to April timeframe if we wanted to do it at all. So this was a matrix that was developed about the service impact score, if you all recall. And so there's certain types of projects, and then we've assigned scores to them, and they fit within those categories within the SGR and minor enhancement in terms of operating efficiency and stuff. So that is how we apply our scoring system to those as well. And so again, you see vehicles down there near the bottom, revenue vehicles, high impact, high impact, high impact. They're going to get a maximum score as long as they meet those, for meeting these types of criteria. And so other things have medium impacts or low impacts and get those scores. So that is a question we get a lot though. So that does ease our burden on that. The incentive score is something that was actually developed by I think it was in the 2022 updates potentially. So this also can put a project over the top. We see that example quite often. So something where it is something that we're making a priority of, and then the agency accountability is also the one where we want these to get these good grant management performance or the various plans that we work with agencies for, that all those are getting turned in and a timely manner. And so this can put this is important. It can put a project over the top, like I said. So we see that happening. So this was an innovation again by this committee and was developed in the CTV policy. So it's something we're still working with today in current policy. So majors, we don't get many of these, as we said, and these are high dollar, which are our capital program in a year, between $80 and $90 million in a typical year at this point, and with inflation factored in there as well. What this doesn't say is, and making into a little bit, is that this is capped by CTV policy at 20% of the annual allocation is available for major projects. So again, the 80% has to go towards SGR and the minor enhancement projects. So major expansions can only have so much of the annual allocation devoted to them. So my staff can send me a nasty email or something if I'm wrong on that. But that's it is capped, just so most is going towards maintaining assets. This scoring is particularly it's based on sort of the smart scale model, and so it is particularly complex. And so within these categories are some various measures based on what was developed back around the 2018 timeframe. So, but yeah, not many of these, but the ones that we do get certainly, we do based on this scoring. So that's the major expansions category. So we wanted to introduce to you all over the last several years we've been doing this. We just want to throw out some challenges that we have seen as staff, and so something for us to look to potentially discuss. So we'll pause here for a minute just so we can you all can check those out. That review period of December 1st to February 1st, if you've got a complex project, it is a lot for us to really give that potentially the scrutiny to then turn around in April and make a recommendation for it. So that is just something that we found. The state's getting, as money gets stretched everywhere, the state's getting more and more requests all the time, or bigger requests. I think whether the volume is higher. So just again, that's just something that we've wanted to point out to you all. The very broad categories, codified. One of my staff, y'all want to explain this to me a little better about what we were really saying here? I don't know if Dan or Grant, I think you reminded me what it was here y'all were with there.
Yeah, so you want me to start at the very top on this one?
No, you can just do the project eligibility. No, just the project
Yeah,
eligibility. What it will.
so project eligibility, and Dan, feel free to jump in here too. I think the idea here is that every year we end up not scoring in certain types of projects.
Right.
Like just as an example, administrative technology, like human resource software, for example, doesn't have an operational impact, scores very low every single year. And so the question I think that we've raised is the transit agencies obviously spend a lot of time preparing their applications, and then we spend time as DRPT staff reviewing and scoring those applications. If there are certain project types that almost never score in, I think the question here is, do we want to mark them as ineligible? And I think there's some pros and cons to that. Obviously, if there's a watershed year where there's a lot of money available, we might be able to fund those types of projects and go deeper into our prioritization list. But then I guess there's also an argument of if we make them as ineligible, then really the percentage of applications that we end up funding are much higher. So we might, in our current process, and I'm just using example numbers, we might fund 70% of applications, but if we make certain types of projects ineligible, we might be funding 90% of the applications submitted. And so I'm not sure if that's a problem. It's kind of up for discussion, I guess, but we wanted to at least point that out as a possible option.
Yeah, thank you, Grant. And then the last one is sort of like the first one a little way. I mean, construction projects, which we seem to be seeing more, whether it be facilities, bus stops, things like that. Just again, a lot of nuance there and other things that can cause delays for one. And so it's just whether we would have the chance to develop a more comprehensive process or change things to allow us to set those projects up for more success and for our funding to be used in a more efficient and effective manner for those types of things. So, so I'll kind of stop there for a second. I don't know if you all had any comments or anything about these, Mr. Chair. Or you want me to call on people? I think Kate has her.
That'd be fine. That'd be fine.
Yeah, just a question. If I recall with the Smart Scale program, there's a pre-application sort of pre-screening thing. Just remind me, is there something like that at all with the DRPT capital program so you guys get a heads up?
We've, in the last couple of years, we have been taking pre-applications. It's just, it's not a whole lot longer. We take them October 1st. Grant, can you remind me? So we're getting a little more time.
Yeah, and Dan can fill in on the specifics, but I think this past year was actually the first year that we started to do the pre-applications, and I can't remember if it was any projects over $3 million or if it was any projects with a construction element. Dan can clarify on that.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, I will clarify. So starting in FY25, we started accepting pre-applications for major expansion projects that had a construction elements. And in 26, we expanded that to all major expansion projects. And we launched that in web grants this past cycle. And so it's fully integrated into our process now.
So can I ask then, as the transit comprehensive plans are developed, strategic plans are developed, would those sort of signal ahead of time that you should be expecting consideration of those projects?
I think that's a great question. They certainly should serve that type of role. Yeah, and we should be looking at that. Yeah.
And to add to that too, we have our agencies submit 5-year capital budgets every year, which are more up-to-date versions of what are included in the capital plans and the TDPs and TSPs and various other plans. And so that 5-year capital budget should give us a even better idea about when people are coming in for all kinds of projects, including big projects.
Mm-hmm. And so if I can understand in terms of the software example that you gave, because HR software would not be funded. That doesn't necessarily mean that a software program related to passenger information about the next bus coming or things like
Right.
that that would not be treated the same way. Is that right?
Exactly. It's whether the operational impact. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that has its own line item in the matrix for the service impact score. If
Right.
there is an operational impact, then we don't treat it as administrative technology.
Okay.
Yeah, great question, man.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions or comments?
Go ahead, Kate.
I have another, but inevitably there's follow on. So I don't presume or know that we'd have a desire to looking at this as being any similarities to smart scale. But does it make sense to have a conversation, not now, but as we move forward, moving to a multi-year or a biannual process for these major ones? I don't want to say akin to smart scale, but I don't know if there's anything to learn from that, or if you guys have constraints in the merit program compared to smart scale. I just know they have a longer review time, and if there's value in that, I think it's an interesting conversation. Do you look at a 2-year program?
Right. No, it's a great question. That kind of thing, I guess, not to speak for the director, should be on the table as you look at this. Yeah. So the review. So great question. And it's funny. It's just you all experience that sort of with your commuter choice and stuff. Although it's a little different because you have 2 programs, but you do see that see that in your programs that come in every other year. So yeah, that's possible. Okay. So that was just, we wanted to introduce some of what we've been seeing. I think as staff, it builds up sometimes. We just want somebody to hear us. So,
And before we leave that, I do have my hand up. A couple thoughts based on the slide and the dialogue. The short review period, I think, is an important thing, and maybe it's just not capital, I'm not sure, but that pre-app and advanced review may apply to things other than major capital. So I just wanted to plant that as a seed, as a possibility to help problem solve. I think a 2-year cycle has pros. It does have cons, especially right now in our current cost estimating and escalation and that kind of mode to plan that far out. City of Falls Church doesn't operate transit, but when we do our projects with smart scale through VDOT and MVTA, that 2-year window is 4 to 6 years out. And so I would not want to go that far out because that makes it harder to be in a 5-year cycle and the strategic planning for our transit providers. So I just, it definitely is worthy of a review, but there's a lot of pros and cons to think through on those variables. Thanks.
Any other comments or questions before we move on? All right.
Thank you, sir. Everybody can still see the screen? Operating assistance at this point? All right.
Yep.
Yeah, we also talked with CTV quickly about the operating assistance program. And so you all were involved even before 2018. Again, there was a performance element put into the operating assistance program. But again, that was refined in 2018 as well, working with you all and consultants. And so you all came up with a list of 6 policy goals that's listed there. And so we still use those as some guiding light there. So again, just 2018 was sort of, I guess, a refinement of what was already going on. And so that's where we're still operating from today. So just a reminder of our process. Again, we take applications during the same time period, December 1st to February 1st. What we review during that time, we get the most recent audited financials or general ledger, look at agency budgets, and then and what that allows for is some, we want to use operating costs. Sometimes that could be treated differently in places, and then also there's things where perhaps somebody's getting money from DRPT to do another thing, and so they need to back that out. So that's what happens during that review sometimes. Just trying to make sure everybody's we're looking at operating costs in a consistent manner across our agencies. And then so then we validate those performance metrics, which include ridership, vehicle revenue miles, things like that. So or Dan, remind me of the other things: vehicle revenue miles, hours, things like that. So revenue miles, hours, things. And then, oops. And then again, with CTB policy, we have our operating systems technical documentation that, also, so there's no surprises. You can, agencies can see what goes into our review of it, but, and then we allocate that to each transit agency, given what the size of the allocation is that year from the CMTF. And so that's going to determine, ultimately what's available. And then it's allocated out according to the, those couple of steps of reviews, the performance metrics, and then get into the details here in a second. But that's the process we go through to arrive at those figures. So the more detail is, so it starts with the sizing metric. And this can be hard to define. What we're trying to do is establish relatively, we have agencies that go from hundreds of buses to 2 buses, budgets of billions literally to budgets of tens of thousands. And so, they all are in the same program. And, all in between as well. So I think you all are very well aware that this tries to set that relative size of all of these against each other to allocate this money. And so this is the first thing that's applied to it. So you can see the percentages, the largest overall part of this transit sizing is based on operating costs. And then we get into, then the ridership as well, which is sort of that performance-based part, as well as vehicle revenue hours and vehicle revenue miles. And so that's the first step. Then the performance adjustments get applied, and you can see on the right there. And so we do use 4 years total of data here. So while the sizing metrics based on operating costs, and those this is based on a little more of a trend over a few years. And so you can see we have 5 performance metrics there that are applied after that sizing metric is applied. That sizing metric is applied to the entire allocation, and then then we apply these performance metrics. We'll get into an example in a second. So that's step 2. And then, of course, there's by CTB policy, there's a 30% cap. And so any agency that meets this 30% cap is not eligible to receive any more assistance, operating assistance. And then that any additional money left over, if there's a redistribution to those agencies that have not reached a 30% cap of their operating cost. So here's a graphic that was developed recently to show just a hypothetical of an agency comes in, gets an allocation of 26.1 million based on their the sizing metric, operating costs, ridership, vehicle revenue hours, vehicle revenue miles. So 26.1 would be their allocation. So then when the performance metrics are applied, you see these metrics are actually in the negative. And so their performance is negative to other trends going on within the state. And so in this particular case, they are going to see a 7% reduction in what their allocation would have been. That's the performance part of it. So they go down to 24.2. Of course, you can see if all these were equally in the positive, they could get a 7% increase to their allocation. And then just to take it a step further, if there was money left over and this agency did not reach its 30% cap, but some others did, and there was money to be redistributed, they would be eligible, this agency would be eligible for a redistribution. And you can see that as much as maybe 770,000 based on the size of this agency. So the size also matters when that redistribution comes about. That sizing metric also matters. So that's just a hypothetical of how the performance adjustment works, performance metrics. So then we still, to carry out just a little more about how the 30% cap might apply. You might have an agency that will be eligible for more money. Kate, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to, since we are talking about the 30%, I remember a lot of work, and I know there's many of us TSDAC members have been involved. There was an incredible amount of analytical work that got us to where we are on these measures. What I can't remember, and I'd love to be reminded, is what was behind the CTB policy on 30%, because I just think it's helpful for us to know sort of what was the design, what was the challenge that they were fixing, and how that got put into place.
Dan, do you have a
So I can give my point of view on this. I admittedly was not involved in the creation of the policy back in 2018, but the 30% was put in place based on the highest allocation that was made in FY19. And it was done in order to make sure that some of the smaller agencies didn't get huge amounts of funding through the program. So you could have an instance where the sizing and performance metrics would lead a smaller agency to get far more than 30%. And so this was seen as a way of making sure that the funds were distributed evenly.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's right. Any of my records are covered with blood, so I don't really.
I was gonna say, one thing I can say is that there was a lot of analytical work to land on the performance measures. And so I do implore DRPT staff to go back and look at all the work the consultants did leading up to those performance measures, because hopefully that will inform as our discussions moving forward. There was a lot of compromise put into the work, or a lot of work put into to come up with where it is right now.
So the slide one right now, again, just sort of illustrates, like, as Dan was saying, perhaps you even have a small or medium-sized agency that could potentially be eligible for well over the 30% cap, but we kind of had to try to make it to where, there's not any windfalls for people. So then that money could be redistributed back out. And, then if other people if everybody reached the cap, which never probably was considered, but this thing called COVID and pandemic funds came along, I don't think it was ever really thought 30% cap everybody would hit it, but there may have been a time, but, so the redistribution is a part of CTB policy though. So as with capital, just wanted to point out a couple of things since we've been going at this for years of what we see either coming up perhaps commonly or just once in a while that we want to point out. Again, just as Kate was kind of alluding to, I don't know if there are just complexities in the formula. It is something that trying to deal with the size and range of agencies we have and the money, how it comes down. There's not surprisingly complexities in trying to really treat everyone fairly and make sure all the money is used wisely and distributed and allocated fairly, and et cetera, et cetera. So it can be hard to explain to those that either don't have a year that's not great given the formula or a year that's better, and just to be able to tell them, like, look, this is, because even if you have a good year, you want to know, is this going to continue or is this an anomaly? So sometimes it can be hard to explain what they're doing or not doing. It may not even be anything they did to make a change. So and then that's sort of the second point as well. It's just required data inputs can change annually. So again, it's all compared. It's a zero-sum game. It's all compared to each other. So you could be cruising along fine, not doing anything wrong, doing everything just fine the way you did it, but you don't do as well because other agencies have done better, perhaps even started lower. So those types of things can be hard to explain. And again, we sort of talked about just in broad, the large and small agencies and the impacts could be a little disparate, and they have to compete in the same space. We have to pay attention to that, try to do that. So yeah, those are sort of our thoughts on that. So I'll be quiet for a second and take another pause. Right.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
Chair, as a comment, I would say those challenges are true, but that was also part of the outcome of the priorities and the direction we were given as state code to execute. So I think it does have complexities, but it does provide some consistency, equitability. We definitely were to do performance metrics, and going back to Kate's point, a lot of analysis and research went into doing that, and we've done small tweaks. And while it is hard to be predictive, because it's transparent, the transit agencies could do some anticipated analysis, never guaranteed, obviously, because of the comparison to their peers at that time. But having been here since day one, we know where we started and why we started this. And so I think we've achieved a lot of those goals and positive outcomes. So the challenges are challenges, but I also see them as they were our response to the opportunity we were given.
Right. I think that's a good summary, Cindy. It was a long road, a lot of challenges along the way, a lot of tweaking here and there, but I think it's been true to the legislation. Any other comments, questions, thoughts?
So I would ask to turn it back over to the director if you were okay with that. She would
Sure. Yes.
let me make sure it's hers. Yep. If that's okay, I would ask to turn it back over to her.
Would you keep sharing your screen though and go to the next slide for me, please? There we go.
Yes.
So first, I just want to thank all of the members for your engagement and your questions. This is exactly what we were hoping for. This is, we're required to undergo a review every few years, so that's what we're doing. And I think at the bottom of this slide, I just want to kind of emphasize our joint goals. We want to remain the best in class in what we do, and we want to deliver the most value and the best outcomes for our customers as efficiently as possible, as these are taxpayer dollars. So as we kind of review the issues and challenges that we pointed out on both capital and operating, we will be looking at our peer states to see if there are any new best practices that have come about in the past few years that we could learn from. Like we talked about earlier, for example, are all of our current methodologies helping to accomplish our goals? Are our current incentives and performance-based metrics based on trends doing what we hoped they would do as applied? Does it make sense to be having all sized agencies compete in one group? Looking at the timeline, all of those things. And with your feedback and input, our staff will be working with a consultant to develop some ideas and potential recommendations that we will bring to you at the next meeting or in an upcoming meeting to discuss and get more feedback on to determine how and whether we move forward from there. So Zach, if you want to go to the next slide, I want to talk about the next steps and timeline exactly. Today's meeting, here we are at March. Today's meeting, April. It's April 1st. We have been doing some work, as Zach mentioned. We met with the CTV subcommittee to provide transparency and give them, let them know this plan of a 3-year review that we were getting ready to embark upon. So today's meeting for you was really to provide a performance update, to review our current methodology and seek input on the program's 3-year review. And as Zach mentioned, we will be consulting with our own staff, looking at all of these issues and challenges. We'll be working with a consultant internally to try and kind of look at the pros and cons, as Cindy mentioned, of all of these policy considerations that we're reviewing, so that we can bring all that back to you. And hopefully the next TSDAC meeting, we'll be reaching out very soon about that. And we hope it will be a more traditional in-person meeting, really to review the draft SIP. That'll be late April or early May. I think this group is traditionally used to having that meeting to talk about how the scoring played out under the methodology. And now that you've had this review, I hope that will be helpful, and I hope it will help us with recommendations going forward. And then after that meeting, we will schedule another meeting to come back to you with some thoughts and draft recommendations internally from our team, working with a consultant. That will likely be in June, just to give you kind of a scope of what this timeline might look like. And as you probably all remember, any changes to this, specifically to the service delivery factors, require a 45-day public comment. So historically, any tweaks to the program, we have taken through this process of a public comment. which we would ideally like to do again, after consulting with you and making a decision if there are recommendations that we want to propose. So after a 45-day public comment, though, we would ideally like to have any recommendations ready for CTV approval by the end of the year. And our idea would be to get those recommendations approved by the end of the year in order to have a FY 2028 implementation. We certainly want to give our staff and our transit partners, if there are any changes made, a full year to prepare and be ready to execute on any new program changes. So implementation in FY 28 as opposed to FY 27 would allow for that to happen. Our staff, as you probably know, spends a lot of time doing webinars in advance of the grant round and doing technical assistance and working on some pre-applications. We would want to have enough time to make sure we were fully ready to educate our partners. And then so our partners obviously are ready to budget and plan for those changes as well. So with that kind of broad timeline and next steps in front of us, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, and see if we have any additional questions or discussion.
Thank you very much, Director Robinson. Let me ask if any members have anything they'd like to ask or suggest going forward, having heard the plan.
Kate has her hand up, sir.
Thanks, and thank you so much, DRB Director Robinson. It's wonderful to have an outline and plan. And I think, as you said, you've got some consultants. As I said, there was a lot of work that took probably 18 months to 2 years in the 2017-2018 timeframe. And so I do really hope, and I know there's a lot of staff changes at DRPT since then, but to really dive in and so you guys can springboard off of what was learned, because I think that'll probably be really insightful as you guys move forward. But I greatly appreciate gathering here. I also, sort of on behalf of the industry in general, understanding that there's going to be a delay in implementation, so there can be the outreach, especially if there's any changes, because it would obviously be near impossible to turn around and apply for funding a month later. So I thank you so much for consideration on the timeline for that. I look forward to sort of having us all be able to dive in and help advise DRPT.
Thank you, Kate. And I just want to say we hope for this to be a collaborative process, and we are being very purposeful about utilizing some consultant help that has access to all of that historical information and all the work you did in the past. So thank you.
Other comments? Cindy's your hand up?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it, Chair. So I do like the timeline, and it gives us a roadmap that April to September looks big, but not when you're talking April, May, June for a lot of feedback. So I guess part of my thinking, because I agree with comments to date and Kate's, is is there anything specific that we know we're looking at now that you could give us a heads up on? Certainly the challenges slides that Zach just outlined from the staff perspective, and Director Robertson, your points about industry best practices and so forth. So one's very small and practical because we're experiencing it. One could be like shooting for the stars. So that seems pretty big potentially, but is there anything that DRPT has identified or heard of so far that might be what we want to look at or being asked for it to be looked at, just so we have a heads up, a sort of, are we eating an elephant or just the mouse?
So that's a big question, and I really appreciate it. I probably don't have the perfect answer, but I'm hoping that our staff, as we dive into this in conjunction with a consultant, will be able to start answering some of those questions and bring all of that back to you for your feedback. I will say that I think in 2022, my understanding is some of the tweaks that were made, we're adding some points for incentives. And we do know we want to look at those really closely to make sure they're actually accomplishing our goals, even if it's potentially a tweak on certain incentives receiving a few more extra points or less points. based on how, looking at kind of the history of the last few years of how those new program incentives have played out in terms of the scoring. We're going to be running a lot of scenarios, as I think you looked at the last time too. Any recommended changes, we want to know and we want to share with you exactly what the fallout would look like in scenarios if we take a year of applications and score them in accordance with any new recommendations, so we can see what that looks like. One of the biggest things I think we will be looking at is the size of all agencies and whether or not it makes sense to do a little bit of what Smart Scale does and create categories or tiers for them to be scored within. That may or may not make sense. Again, I'm not proposing, these are not my recommendations, but it's just things that we think based on some lessons learned we want to take a look at. Looking at performance metrics based on trends as things have changed and come a long way since COVID, and since we had a lot of extra money, we want to make sure that all makes sense and no tweaks need to be made there. We also want to look at that 30% cap and how that is applied, and whether or not, based on performance metrics, it should be applied to everyone across the board. So I hope that gives you a flavor of some of the things we're looking for. But again, it's going to be a group effort between this team on this call and stakeholders and consultants and our staff.
Chair, if I could follow up, I do want to say thank you for that. That is helpful to give me a sense of the flavor. And definitely I'll reinforce the teamwork. I know all my TSDAC members are there with you, and I certainly am. And John and I have survived it from the beginning, and so ready to do it again. But I do hope that we're doing the trending and learning from it, but not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, since I'm on a roll for sayings today. I do like the scenarios, so I appreciate hearing that and trends, because, and that you mentioned COVID, because that was in my mind. I think we are, and we've held sort of like, don't change a lot because we're still coming out of COVID. And there'll always be something because we now have the federal government changes. But I do think we need to look at those trends, because I'm not sure that we're totally out of COVID, or we're about to have, as I said at the beginning, another inject of uncertainty. It's hard to predict that, but I do think we need to factor that into some of the scenarios if there's some way you can put a proxy in for that. And I'm glad, although it always amazes me how time flies, we're back at the 3-year period to look at this. But, we are doing the DMV moves and we are doing the SJ28. And so transit is in the forefront of conversations, and that means we need data and analysis under it. So I think this can be helpful from sort of a more macro picture as well. Thank you, Chair and DRPT Director.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cindy, for those very good comments. I see Jim Dyke's hand.
Yeah, Cindy, I think touched on a couple of things I was going to raise, but because I see that Secretary Duffy on the federal level is scheduled to speak to Congress tomorrow. And I was, as Cindy alluded to, hopefully, if to the extent we get any intelligence at all on what's happening at the federal level and how that's going to factor into what we're doing, the sooner we can get that information spread around, the better.
Right, good point, Jim. I think we're all anxious to know what direction that the national government is heading in, so that we know how we have to respond. And obviously, there's potential for a significant increased cost in our capital projects in the coming years. We'll need to be prepared to figure out. Any other comments or questions? I don't see anybody else's hand up at the moment, but that's probably, oh, here we go. There's Cindy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just did one small thing I thought about afterwards that was tied more to capital, is I definitely am intrigued with the conversation about identifying ineligible projects if it saves everybody time and energy. There are, as Zach indicated, some cons to that. And so one of the things that was rolling in my mind, if we're always seeing HR software as an ineligible activity, do we make that ineligible, or do we consider the factors that are making it ineligible, because I don't know a transit operator that can run a program without some kind of software to manage the personnel part of operating. And so in my mind, human resources is operating. So a sort of a small, as we're looking at those kind of questions, to think about those kind of nuances would be my ask.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Any other comments? Looks like everybody is either stunned or satisfied. So I'll assume it's the latter. Anything else anybody would like to bring up? Any discussion of any of these topics we've been discussing today, or any other item for the good of the cause? Hearing none. Do we have any public comment today? Not getting any response. I guess that's a no.
Hopefully they're all out riding transit. All right. Any Zach, are you handling this wrap up, or have we pretty much well gotten through that?
I think I think as Director Robinson said, we would love to meet with you all next month. By that time, we will have given the draft SIP to the CTB and perhaps just go over with you all how the operating and capital formula played out and for fiscal year 26. Just kind of talk about that for a bit. And, we are required to have a public hearing with TSDAC every year. So if we could get together in person, if that would allow everybody enough time to plan and get together in person, have that public hearing, essentially. So I see Cindy's hand is up. We get in trouble with your budget process, Cindy?
No, we're not adopting till May because we're going as far along as we can to see what's happening at the federal level. So April's good. I agree with in-person and public hearing. I was just going to ask that whatever additional thoughts you have, because this is going to be iterative on changes and trends while we're together, maybe we could talk about it, because the outcome of the SIP and this current process may trigger some additional challenges or opportunities. So since we're going to get together, if we could circle back to this sort of big topic, so it's iterative as we go along. I was just going to ask that to be part of the agenda, even if it's not a lot of time yet for the consultant staff work, but just keep in touch base.
Sounds like a plan. Okay. If that's it in terms of wrap-ups, I guess I would ask anything else anyone wants to bring before us today. If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Yeah, it's moved and seconded by everybody. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Abstentions? Thank you very much. Look forward to our next meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.